You're watching the Luca Rosano Show. Here's your host, Luca Rosano.
What is going on, everyone? Happy Friday and welcome back to another edition of the Luca Rosano Show. I'm super excited to have this guest. He's, one of my biggest idols when talking about, the media landscape scene. He's really great at what he does, and he's now on the show. Welcoming in the Raptors reporter for The Athletic Toronto, Mr. Blake Murphy. Blake, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
I'm doing great, especially feeling great after that impressive win against the Warriors. Started off a little bit shaky for the Raptors, but I just wanted to talk to you about that game. So let's just dive right into it, Blake. You cover this team obviously super closely. Let's first start with Norman Powell. Norman Powell impressed me in that game against the Warriors. He's the reason why, in my opinion, the Raptors ultimately won that game after getting off to that slow start. He did get a career high 37 points. What was your just reaction to Norm's performance, and how key is Norm Powell to the Raptors' success, especially come playoff time?
Yeah, it's a weird thing where, he has this career night, he goes off for 37 points, but what has stood out to me, obviously 37 points is awesome, you get a career high, but for me it's more that, that's his fourth straight game back from injury where he's given them 20 plus, and it's, I think, 15 of the last 30 where he's done it now, and he's only had 2 single-digit scoring nights in his last 15 or 16. So for me, obviously the 37 is awesome, but the more important factor, bigger picture for Norman Powell and where he fits with this team is that he started to string those games together a lot more frequently. And if you look at what this team does well and what they need help with, that level of secondary scoring, whether he's filling in as a starter or, kind of leading those bench units, that's huge for them. And I think, it's a falsehood that there are guys who can go out in that role and give you 20 or 18 every night. But the fact that he's, Nick Nurse is fond of saying, well, can you turn 2 out of every 3 games into 3 out of every 4 and 4 out of every 5? And I think he's doing that now over the course of this year. And that consistency has kind of always been his limiting factor, where sometimes he'd be in the rotation and be great. Other times you wouldn't get much from him. Even within the same game, you might get a couple good minutes and then lose him for the rest of the game. And I think for his personal growth and then what he could do for this team in the postseason, it's that level of consistent secondary scoring that's most important.
Yeah, and just to me, I mean, whenever Norman Powell is on his game, it just seems like the Raptors hit a whole new level, and they're very tough to beat when that happens. Let's switch gears now to Serge Ibaka, who returned from injury. He had a solid outing, 13 points and 13 boards in about 30 minutes of action. How did he look to you, Blake?
Yeah, he looked good. I don't think there was anything too serious there. Anytime a guy who's 30 plus and has played a lot of minutes gets some knee soreness, they're going to take it cautious. That's something he sat a couple games with last year as well, although it wasn't. Those were individual games. But I don't think there was too much concern. And then it didn't look like he missed much of a step at all. Obviously, it would have been nice for them to have him over that mini losing streak there, where they were playing way too small. Or smaller than they would like to, certainly. But I think he's fine. And I think with Marc Gasol told me Tuesday that he's, quote, almost there. So I think the Raptors are getting there. And I know the way this season has gone, everyone will probably just expect someone else to get hurt once Gasol and VanVleet are back. But it'll be nice to see this team a little closer to health.
So, yeah, that's interesting. You said that Marc Gasol said that he's almost there. Could you provide us an update with Fred VanVleet, as Raptors fans are hoping he can return back to the lineup very, very soon?
Yeah, Fred's is a little more up in the air, I think. I don't think there was, even though he was questionable Thursday, I don't think there was much chance that he was going to play. There's nothing structural there with his shoulder. It's not the same shoulder that he injured in the playoffs 2 years ago, so that's a good thing. But there's soreness there, and, he has range of motion, but at the, you look at his jump shot form, and there are times there, and then especially defensively when you're fighting around screens and stuff, where they just don't want to push it. They're playing it cautious. I'd be a little surprised if he played both legs of the back-to-back here in Sacramento, Utah, because it's a back-to-back scenario. And I think my thinking's kind of the same with Gasol. Even though he might be close, they probably don't want to bring him back and drop him right into a back-to-back. So, I kind of have Monday in mind for both of those guys, if not, the first game after the road trip, because they do have 4 days off coming off of this trip where if they can get through Sacramento and Utah without bringing those guys back, then, they'll enter next weekend very, very certain that those guys are ready to go.
And that's when they play some pretty heavy-duty opponents. Blake, let's get back to the game yesterday. Raptors obviously victorious over the Warriors in the Bay Area. I want to get your thoughts on Patrick McCaw. Now, you know better than me that Raptors fans have pretty much called for his head all season. He did log 24 minutes last night, 0 points. How do you think Pat McCaw will fit into this Raptors rotation when the Raptors are fully healthy, hopefully come playoff time?
Yeah, the Patrick McCaw thing's a little tough, and I wrote about it at The Athletic this week, mostly not because I find it particularly interesting. I think it's pretty straightforward what's going on, but, the conversation has gone a little too far. Like, people are blaming him for a 3-game losing streak where the Raptors were down Ibaka, Gasol, and VanVleet and played Milwaukee and Denver on the road. Like, that, there's just no way those circumstances are Patrick McCaw's fault. At the same time, I get the frustration because to the eye test, it doesn't look like he's providing a lot on offense. Defensively, he's good sometimes, but he is a little bit prone to blow-bys just because of the style of defense he plays. And then, analytically, if there were things that the eye test weren't picking up that were helping the team, you would hope that that would show up in how the team performs with him on the court eventually. And we're talking like almost a 900-minute sample on the year here, and he has kind of team worst on-off numbers, team worst advanced metrics. So there's not an obvious compelling case for him to be getting these minutes over a Terrence Davis, who, yes, is pretty inconsistent because he's a rookie, but pretty clearly has a higher ceiling, or even a Matt Thomas, who people want to see more of in the specialist role. Nurse obviously disagrees with the general consensus from the fan base there, and I certainly don't think McCaw is sinking them or anything like that, but I do think that when the team is healthy, if McCaw is still pretty firmly locked into a 15, 20-minute-a-game role, then that's a much bigger conversation. I think, Nurse talks about him as the eighth guy in the rotation. I think that should be a spot that's, open for a little more competition with Terrence Davis in the mix, with even Matt Thomas in the mix a little bit. Obviously, if matchup dictates, you'd go to a forward in Boucher or Rondae Hollis-Jefferson. But for right now, I think it's a little overblown. But if it's still the case in mid-April, then we're going to have a pretty serious discussion about it.
Blake, let's talk about another guy who the Raptors fans were kind of getting after as well these past couple of games, and that's Pascal Siakam. Now, he did come up big late in that win against the Warriors. He had a couple of key major buckets. I want to get your opinion on this. Do you trust Pascal Siakam as the Raptors' go-to guy late in games? Because there's obviously been chatter that, some people don't believe that Pascal can show up late in a game when called upon.
I mean, look, this guy was their number 2 scorer when they just won a championship. I don't think it's a pressure thing. I don't think it's a big moment thing. I don't think it's a showing up thing. I think if we're being realistic about it, this is his 4th season in the league, and it's his first year as a number 1 option. So he's got 50 games under his belt being the guy, and that's not a lot of sample to kind of grow into that role. So I think, yeah, he started the season really hot, and expectations were really high. And then defenses really started to key in on him, and he's still figuring that out when a second body comes at him on the perimeter, or when there's a second guy there in the paint and he drives, or when opponents are sticking their best defender on him. That's still something he's figuring out. And I think, yeah, the last couple of weeks it's been a little extreme, the degree to which he's struggling to finish around the rim or maybe settling for pull-up jump shots. But bigger picture, you expected some stumbles like this. He's still giving them 20-plus points on average efficiency. Yeah, his playmaking needs to improve and some of his decision-making, but nobody should have expected Pascal Siakam to slide into a number 1 scorer's role seamlessly without any of these bumps. The whole point of the year was kind of, run it back and get Siakam that experience and get him those reps. And Nick Nurse has talked about trying to focus on that even more down the stretch. I thought Thursday's game was, obviously Siakam didn't have a great night overall, but I thought from a process perspective, the way they handled that late in the game was smart. They had Kyle Lowry screen for him to get a switch on a key play. They had Norman Powell screen for him at first to get a switch, and then Siakam kind of rejected it and went the other way and caught his defender leaning the wrong way. And I think those are ways that you can get Siakam those late game reps and get him a little more intelligently, with a guard screening for him to get more of a size advantage, to get him even just attacking with a head of steam instead of kind of stringing it out and attacking one-on-one. These are growth areas for him, and it's, this year was always kind of about him learning and developing in that role. And yeah, there's a little bit of urgency now because April's a month away and you want to see him ready for the postseason. But I don't think it's realistic to think at some point the light's just going to go on and he's going to be able to do this without some stumbles. It's a really hard thing they're asking him to do, and it's a really big role. And there are going to be nights that he's awesome in it, and there are going to be nights that he's still figuring it out.
Yeah, it's just the growing pains, like you said, as he transitions as the team's main number one. Blake, so unlike February, the Raptors have a very tough March in store, including a 6-game set. They're going to see teams like the Warriors, Sixers, Celtics, Nuggets, and Lakers. Now, aside from health, what's the biggest key for the Raptors to survive this month and, more importantly, hang on to that 2 seed in the East?
Yeah, that's big. And I think, obviously the team is going to tell you that they're focused on making sure they're healthy and in a good place come mid-April. And I get that, and I appreciate the sentiment. But that 2 seed is really important. That 2 seed is important not only because the drop-off from an Indy or a Philly to a Brooklyn or an Orlando is significant, but if you're confident about how you're going to do in the first round, well, then that 2 seed could also mean home court in the second round versus, Boston or Philadelphia, depending on how the seeding shakes out. So if you look ahead you don't want to look ahead to the second round necessarily, but if you're kind of looking at the probabilities over the course of the whole postseason, that 2 seed drastically increases your chances of getting out of the first round, and then it pretty meaningfully increases your chances of winning a second round series because you'd have game 7 at home. So I think that's pretty important. Health is a big one because that's just going to kind of dictate, how basically it's going to dictate to what degree their foot's on the gas. If guys are in and out of the lineup and guys are banged up, they're just not going to be able to ride guys and really fight for that 2 seed. But if everyone's back and suddenly you're able to scale minutes back from 40 to 35 and even get a guy an odd night off on a back-to-back against a weaker opponent or something like that, then I think, you could probably push a little bit more for that 2 seed. So I think health is a big one. I think how Siakam's growing in this role is a big one. I think, you want to, probably from a lineup perspective, the biggest thing you want to get a look at is those last 2 games against Milwaukee and the game against Philadelphia, and maybe even the Miami one late in the year. You want to really test how that Lowry VanVleet backcourt looks against bigger potential playoff opponents. Obviously, that duo has been really good, but if there's a concern with it, it's against those kind of bigger, longer teams, and whether you want to find out whether maybe you're better off with Fred VanVleet coming off the bench in a matchup like that, or at least coming out earlier and mixing up those lineups a little bit. So those are the kind of things I'm looking for. There's not one big overarching thing, but I think there's, as far as 20 games left is concerned, there's still a lot of learning that this team can do while they're pushing for, they're going to be playing some pretty high leverage games here with the 2 seed in the balance.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a big point you brought up earlier when you said, a lot of these series are going to come down to who has home court, and you can make a case for anybody. 1 through 6 in the East. So these series, in my opinion, ultimately could be decided on, who has home court advantage for potential game 7. And also I said that the 2 seed would be huge for the Raptors to potentially get back to an Eastern Conference Finals, to which I'm going to put you on the spot now, Blake. What percentage do you give the Raptors to get back to an Eastern Conference Finals in a season where we already knew the narrative, people were writing them off, people didn't expect much from this team? What percentage would you give this team moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's pretty close to a coin flip, which I realize sounds like a cop-out, but Boston is really good. And when you factor in the fact that, the Raptors maybe only have, say, a 55% chance to lock down the 2 seed, well, then suddenly there's a 45% chance they're playing a 6 or 7 game series in the first round and then going to visit Boston in the second round. So I'm not willing to go too much further than that. I think them against Boston is the series that I want to see. Like, I feel like we've been tiptoeing around a Raptors-Celtics playoff series for 5 years now. I really want to see it. I would just be a lot more comfortable if the Raptors have the easier first-round opponent and home court. I think, like you said, 1 through 6 in the East, I think Milwaukee's in a tier of their own. I would probably put Boston and Toronto as the number 2 tier, and then Philly, Miami, and Indiana, kind of based on – the big thing is Philadelphia's health. They could be a second-tier team if they're healthy, but if they're not, then they're probably down there with Miami and Indiana. So, I don't have a strong feel because Boston's really good, man. And a lot of this could come down to the seeding and the matchups. And are you the team that gets out of the first round healthy and rested, or are you the team that gets out of the first round kind of having had your ass kicked and limping into the second round?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Blake. I think the Celtics are overlooked in a sense because when everybody's talking about the favorite in the East, everybody's quick to point to Milwaukee. But I think the Celtics could make a strong run. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we see the Celtics come June playing an NBA Finals, so that'd be interesting to monitor. Of course, guys, Blake's got the Raptors down pat covered. You could catch all of his work, read all of his work over at The Athletic. He does a great job covering this team. I'm going to put the link to that down in the description box below. Blake, before I let you go, though, I love to do this with all my guests. I want to play a little bit of some rapid-fire questions with you, if you don't mind. So, you ready to go?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so the first question I got for you here, Blake, is if you could change lives with one person for a day, who would it be?
Jeez, I thought these were going to be Raptors rapid-fire questions.
This is going to be personal. I want to know more about Blake Murphy.
Oh, man. I don't want to change lives with anyone.
There you go. That's a good answer. Never eat candy again or never drink soda again?
Never drink soda. I don't really like pop other than as mix anyway.
Favorite TV show of all time?
Probably Scrubs.
What adjective best describes your skills on the court?
Patrick McCaw.
Favorite interview you've ever done?
Probably Eric Thames, who is now with the Washington Nationals. He was like a failed Jays prospect who then went over to Korea and became the Korean home run and stolen base champion. And while he was over in Korea, I did one of my favorite stories with him on life over there and kind of transitioning to being a Korean baseball god.
That's cool. We're going to segue into some basketball questions. Who's your NBA MVP right now?
Giannis.
And lastly here, Blake, would you like to see Canada eventually get another NBA team?
Yes, but I'm a little skeptical about the viability. I know people want a team back in Vancouver, but if you're looking at expansion, I think Seattle is probably a more natural Pacific Northwest location for a team. And then, I don't know if the league would have the comfort level in Montreal. So I would like to see it, and I think basketball's grown here enough, but I'm a little skeptical.
Raptors reporter for The Athletic Toronto, Blake Murphy. Blake, I cannot thank you enough for your time, and everybody watching this, if you're not already familiar with this man's work, you definitely got to check him out. All of his links will be down below. Blake, thank you so much, man, and I hope we can do this sometime again down the stretch.
Yeah, when I have a video camera on me so I can actually do the podcast properly. Sorry about that, man.
It's all good. I'll hold you to that, though. Thanks, Blake. Have a good one.
Thanks, man.
Hope you guys liked that interview with Blake Murphy. If you enjoyed it, please smash that like button. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you are new. Also, hit post notifications so you never miss another one of my videos. Share this. Feel free to share it amongst your friends. And also, follow me on social media, guys. Keep the conversation rolling on there. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and I'm now on TikTok. I do a lot to bring you guys the best guests available and the best guests possible. So definitely let me know your feedback on all these podcasts. The Luca Rosano Show coming to you every Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern. That does it for another edition of this show. Until next time, this is Luca Rosano. Have yourselves a great weekend, and I'll catch you all again in the next one. Peace out.